Let me just quickly introduce Jody. We're very happy to have you tonight. Thank you for spending some time with us. Very briefly, Jody is the Bruce and Bridget Evans Managing Director of the Harvard Innovation Lab. She focuses on bridging the gap between the iLab and entrepreneurship community. She brings over 15 years of experience as a high-tech entrepreneur and investor with a focus on innovative consumer technologies. She has industry expertise in consumer, e-commerce, mobile, social networking, and luxury goods. She has been on the management team of several venture-backed startups that have been successful, including iMarket, Mobicus, and Drink. Also, she was an investor at TS Oceanus early on. I will be interested to learn about that experience. Jody started her career right out of the MBA at GE and the FMP program. And she is also an MBA from Harvard and a BS of International Business from the University of Vermont. So we're very excited to have you here, and please, a big applause for me join in welcoming Jody Olson. So it's customary to start a conversation by talking a little bit about your background, how you started, where you grew up, your first experiences, where you go to high school, college, and just get started about a little bit about you.
Okay, sure. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. I actually hate talking about myself, so hopefully this will go okay. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. This is such a great organization. We spend so much time helping entrepreneurs understand the entrepreneurial journey. So what you do is so, so near and dear to my heart. And I also have to give a plug to Pivotal Labs. As we were walking in, we saw the art from a company called Art Lifting. So I have to give a plug for them because they're an iLab company. So Pivotal Labs, thank you so much for supporting them. They're actually, they bring art to the world from homeless and disabled artists. So just an example of an amazing iLab company, and it was really cool to see walking in here today. So with that done, in terms of my background, it's so funny because people always say to me, how did you end up in this job? It seemed so perfectly suited for your background and your experiences, and it must have been so intentional, and obviously it wasn't. It was serendipity along the way. But as you reflect and you look back on your life, you think about how everything led you to where you are today. And when you ask about my childhood, it's always very comical to describe it to people. Because it was somewhat unconventional childhood, but looking back, and at the time it just felt weird, it really contributed to the person I am today. So I grew up in an incredibly small town in Vermont. It was at a ski area called Mount Snow. I don't know if any skier has ever been to Mount Snow. You might have stayed. My parents had a hotel and restaurant in Mount Snow, Vermont. So I was one of these really strange kids who actually lived in a hotel, literally. As a really young kid, it was kind of cool because you'd invite your friends over and you'd have a swimming pool and tennis courts and unlimited quarters for the video machines. But, as I grew up, I had parents who were running their own small business, worked incredibly hard. So I attribute a lot of my work ethic to them. They were the consummate entrepreneurs, literally. And my risk profile, I think I got from them. I think about when they had two very small children, they basically mortgaged everything they had to follow their dreams to own a hotel in Vermont. And to take that risk, and you think about so many entrepreneurs today taking risks, I mean, they really took a risk because it was their life and their children's livelihood. So I learned a lot from that. But it also, because they worked so hard, I was really independent at a very young age. And so I think I learned my resourcefulness and tenacity and those kinds of qualities at a very young age that serve you very well in entrepreneurship. I didn't know it at the time. But growing up in a very small town, as a kid, all I wanted to do was get out. Never want to go back to Vermont, get me out of here. And loved the idea of travel and learning as much as I could and absorbing as much as I could in a short period of time. Ended up going to my state school. I couldn't afford to go anywhere else and was a little disappointed, but ended up loving it. And then, doing the recruiting out of undergrad, the typical investment banks, consulting firms, was all very appealing. And then General Electric came along. I just signed up for the interview for the fun of it. And they promised me to ship me off to a new GE business every 3 months, and I get to see the world, and I get to learn about lots and lots of different industries and disciplines within those industries. And something in me said, you know what, this sounds much cooler than an investment banking job. So shipped off to Cincinnati, Ohio, GE Aircraft Engines as my first assignment. And I don't know how much detail you want to go into that, but that was quite the experience. And then went from there. So literally had 10 years of experience in a short, compressed 3-year time frame. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with GE and the management training programs, but they invest a lot in their employees early on, to kind of groom them to be the leaders of all of their businesses. So it was just a tremendous learning experience. But along the way, as you learn about yourself, realize that I probably wasn't made for corporate life. Tended to be a rule breaker, not a rule follower. Didn't understand why certain rules existed. And also was a risk taker. If I saw something that didn't make sense, I just wanted to change it. And not always easy to do in a very big corporation. So had a wonderful experience, but wanted to do something that really I could follow my passion and use that skill set that I was looking for. Had the opportunity to, and always knew, entrepreneurship was somewhere out there. I knew I didn't want to go in the hotel business because I saw how hard my parents worked. My dad was very disappointed I didn't go to the hotel school of management at Cornell. But that was the last thing I wanted to do. But really wanted to think about entrepreneurship, but wasn't one of those people who had an idea and was going to start a company, I was 23. And so I had the opportunity to go into the venture capital industry. And it wasn't as cool as it is today. I don't want to say, not necessarily cool, but it wasn't a career path that was as conventional maybe as it is today. But what it enabled me to do was learn about entrepreneurship from the other side and understand what it takes to start and grow and nurture a business. So kind of just jumped at the chance. It wasn't, I always knew I wanted to be a venture capitalist by any means, but it seemed like the next step for me to kind of understand this whole world of entrepreneurship. You want me to keep going? I can.
But I wanted to ask you, what drove you there? You weren't made for the corporate environment, but how do you know, it's not starting your own business from the investment side?
Yeah.
So what attracted you to that possibility of funding companies, or what was exactly that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was, all these decisions are always your gut, something about it felt right. I wanted to understand what it took to start and grow a business, and wanted to get to know founders and the whole process for early stage entrepreneurship. So I thought, what better way than to do it on the investment side? And my job, I was an associate, so most of these VC firms hire out of business school. I was pre-business school. Many firms didn't do that. So as an associate, you are tasked really with cold calling CEOs and entrepreneurs, which, by the way, is an amazing skill. I recommend it. It's kind of a sales job in some strange way. And after doing that, you're not afraid of anything. You will pick up the phone and literally call anyone and show up, which is, again, another skill I learned as an entrepreneur. But got to know so many incredible founders and entrepreneurs. I was kind of a terrible investor because I wanted to spend all my time with the portfolio companies because I just got excited about the market opportunity and helping to figure out business models and how do we grow this thing. But as an investor, you're supposed to go put more money to work and hopefully not spend a lot of time with the portfolio companies if all was going right. So I just got really invested and excited about entrepreneurship through that. So it was kind of a backdoor and a roundabout way of understanding that I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
So did you join after that a few startups, or what happened next? Were there about for 2 years, right, or something like that?
Yeah, and in the VC world, if they hire you before business school, you got to then go to business school. So I went to business school, and at a really fortuitous time, or maybe not, depending on kind of how you look at it. 1994, I know I'm dating myself, we were actually the first class at HBS to get email. Believe it or not. I mean, it's so silly to think about it now, but I'll never forget AOL. You got mail, and it was a really big deal. The professors communicated to us and sent us our assignments through email. No one had ever done that before, and it was just the beginning of this thing called the internet. And so during my time at HBS, I just got really excited about this new burgeoning industry. No one really knew what it was going to be, but I knew it was a really unique time in history. And I thought, you know what, I can always go get a job at a consulting firm or investment bank. Why don't I just go try this? And so coming out of business school, it was unheard of to take a job in a startup. My classmates laughed at me, and my advisors thought I was crazy. There was only one or two entrepreneurship professors, and they were supportive, thankfully. But not the traditional career path. There were a couple companies called Yahoo and Amazon that started interviewing on campus. I wanted to stay in Boston for a number of reasons, so I didn't take any of those jobs out there. But I had, maybe a handful of friends take jobs in startups, and one of them became a millionaire before she even started work at Yahoo, because they went public before she started her job in the fall. So I'm a little upset with myself about that one. But it was really unusual. Like, people weren't doing that. And so joined a startup, had my revenge when a couple years later, all of my classmates were then asking me, how do I get a job in a startup? And they were all quitting their jobs. It was that crazy time in the universe. But that started my journey into entrepreneurship. And it was just this kind of excitement over the possibilities, and I didn't really know what it was. And so I spent, and we can talk however much detail you want, I've done about a half a dozen startups over that 15-year time period, starting in 1996. Various stages of moderate successes and enormous failures and everything in between. I started off with kind of consumer internet ideas, and was always fascinated by new paradigms and business models, and how do you create a market, how do you disrupt other markets. And then moved over to mobile when the internet became too mature and it was not as much fun as it used to be. So had an amazing journey along those lines, and I can talk about each of them or a couple of them.
Maybe maybe a couple of those examples, and I'm interested in listening to the last one, Drink, but maybe before that, a couple that maybe something significant about those you can point out, or a good anecdote would be a good way to talk about those.
I always tell people when they ask for advice that I learned so much more from my failures than my successes. The successes were often luck and timing and not really us doing things necessarily right. But Plan It All was one of my first companies that was actually sold to Amazon in 1998 for $100 million, which was a lot of money back then, particularly for an internet company when there weren't that many of them. And there was just an article written recently, I think VentureFizz did it, about Plan It All being the first worldwide social network, and who knew it was founded in Boston. And it was kind of interesting because when I joined Plan It All as one of the first employees, there was an MIT and an HBS founder, and we pulled together and decided we were going to do this thing that helped people connect with each other. Connect with your friends and your colleagues, and we had this really cool feature where, I think it was called Crossing Paths, where you were traveling and I was traveling and we were linked together, and we'd know we were in the same place, and it was just this amazing database of all of your friends and colleagues. So the word social network didn't exist. I think at one time we were growing faster than the internet. We were able to acquire 1.5 million customers. It was all about customer acquisition at that point, and just this race to acquire customers and then start monetizing them. It was probably, looking back on it, one of the most exciting times of my life, because it really was the Wild West, and I was doing deals with the Yahoos and the Lycos and Excite and Netscape and companies that don't exist anymore. And no money was exchanging hands because we were all trying to figure out what to do. And when Amazon came along, they were a young, growing company, and they didn't know what to do either, but they knew that they needed to know a lot about their customers. It was all about how can we sell stuff to them and e-commerce. So they used our social networking platform, supposedly, for e-commerce purposes. But I still look back on that as maybe the biggest failure because they never did anything with it. They paid a lot of money, which, yeah, that's nice, it's a nice exit, but nothing ever happened. And, we were, 8 years too early for social networks, but it really was, the first social networking, which was, quite fascinating looking back on it. So learned a lot through that experience, tremendously. And, another company, and one thing I've realized in my career is that I have this uncanny ability to be too early to market, which you think is a good thing because you think you're visionary, but it's a terrible thing because if the market's not ready for your product, your company can't exist. And I seem to have that knack of knowing something is happening, but the market doesn't know what I know. I don't know. So Mobitious was another one. So that was one of my first mobile startups. And believe it or not, it was this idea of mobile photo sharing. Instagram, before that existed. We decided that Twitter had just started. We thought this is really interesting and people sharing ideas. How about sharing photos? And so, again, a company that had an amazing idea, an amazing product, and actually pretty great execution, but the market timing was off. And so, you learn a lot about that. Little did we know, 5 years later, the market was ready. Interestingly enough, when we were acquiring customers, it was a very global population. We didn't have a lot of U.S. customers, but worldwide, a tremendous amount because they didn't have computers. And so this was their only means of sharing photos when everyone else had the PC and the desktop platform. So I don't know, really interesting experience there. And I'll pause to let you ask another question.
So I was going to say, what would you say in terms of being too soon to market?
Yeah.
What advice would you give to people to how to evaluate that? Now you have experiences in that regard. Are there any indicators, anything that would give you a sense of how to test for that if somebody here has an idea and they're doubting if it's too soon?
Yeah, and we deal with this a lot at the iLab too. Students who have an idea, and it's typically based upon their own personal pain point, and they try it out with their friends, and everyone thinks it's the best idea, and they think they have a company, and they think there is a market. Or there's a technology that is, solving a problem, a scientific discovery or something, and they think, we're doing something no one else is doing. This is great. We're going to be a big company. But until you get validation from actual customers who are going to pay for what it is you have, there's really no reason for it. So developing an MVP, developing a prototype as early as possible, testing it with customers as early and often as possible, but also really listening to the feedback. I find that a lot of people test it with customers and then don't agree with what they're saying. I can't remember the company, and I don't want to disparage them, but it was some kind of social network for gaming, and they were testing with a bunch of customers, and they thought it was going to be for like 18 to 24-year-olds, and as they did their focus groups and all of their customer user experience, they realized all these moms were using it, and they were in these, having these discussion groups, and they were really excited about connecting, and they said, well, what are these people doing? We want the 18 to 24-year-olds. But little did they know that what it is that they were putting in the marketplace, the 18 to 24-year-olds didn't want. What their hypothesis about the use case was very different from the actual use case. And what they should have done was pivoted and said, wait, we should go after this segment of the market. But instead, they kept trying to change it. So the 18 to 24-year-olds wanted what they were doing. So I think truly listening to the market and listening to your customers, very early and very often, I think is really important. And, there's not a lot you can do about being early to market. I mean, you can do everything right, but if the market's not ready, it's not ready.
Yeah, that's great advice. Maybe talk a little bit briefly about the company before you joined the Innovation Lab, because it was a photo sharing, but a more focus on Drink. How that
Drink. So
Yeah.
Drink was not necessarily photo sharing. It was researching and remembering wine. And the use case was taking pictures of the wine bottles so you could remember wines. And again, a lot of companies are formed out of personal pain points. And very funny. And I'm not an alcoholic by any means, but I had another company called SendWine.com that was back in the bubble, and we could talk about that too. That was a really interesting experience. But funny that I was involved in 2 wine companies, and I'm not really a wine expert, but personal pain point, traveling through Italy with family and friends and going to all these amazing wineries, and couldn't remember the names of all the amazing wines we were drinking because they're really long names of Italian vineyards. It was when the iPhone first came out, and so we started taking pictures with our new fancy iPhone and storing them in our photo library. And my co-founder was sort of a product development, product design guy, and we kind of had this light bulb go off, I think after a few glasses of wine, and we're saying, you know what, wouldn't it be interesting to develop a product that allowed you to research and remember wines, and then when we get back to the States, we can then go buy them, we can share them, we can order them in restaurants. So that's kind of where the idea came from. And then they launched the App Store. And it was just, again, this perfect timing of, wow, this is a really interesting new distribution channel or platform for products. We had no idea it was going to be a big thing, and it was very early stages. So we thought, why not? It's low cost. We can build a product and we can launch it into the App Store, and talk about customer feedback. Get instant customer feedback. So you're basically in beta from day one. And so it was an interesting and wild ride because the smartphone market was early stages, the App Store was early stages. We were one of the first apps in the App Store, one of the first, if not the first, wine app. And now there's hundreds of them. Obviously, I'm sure many of you have seen them. But really interesting to see that journey of a new distribution channel and platform take off. So that was a great experience. And by the way, Drink still exists. You can download it from the App Store. I'm no longer involved day to day, but my partner, my co-founder, still is.
So how do you went from that into the app? What's the story there? How do you get involved in the app?
Yeah. So I was involved with Drink, and it was actually my first bootstrapped venture. All my other ventures had been, venture-backed, institutional money. We decided to bootstrap this because it didn't really cost a lot to do what we were doing. But then thought, you know what, I don't know if I want to do this full time. I kind of want this to be a side project, and I got to go out and get a real job. And actually tried to get a real job and interviewed at a bunch of real companies with real employees and benefits and salary and all those things I never had, and just couldn't do it. Could not. There's just, I think once you're on the other side and you've been in the startup world for so long, I was incapable of getting a real job. My sweet spot for ventures was like 0 to 25 employees. If we hit like 30, 40, 50, that was too big and I couldn't handle it. I really like the very early stage, identifying the market, what's our business model, develop the product. And at first I thought something was wrong with me. I had job ADD because 6 different jobs and 15 years is kind of a lot. But then I realized I just like that phase of development. So realized I was incapable of getting a real job. What do I do now? I'm kind of at that stage of my career where you want to give back and you want to share your experiences and your learnings with other people. I wanted to help other entrepreneurs and didn't really know how to do that. I thought about going back into the VC world and wasn't sure I wanted to do that because I felt like I would be too far removed from the entrepreneurship. And right around that same time, again, serendipity is so prevalent in my career. A friend of mine who worked at Harvard called me and said, I just saw this job posting and it kind of has your name written all over it. And it was this posting for the director of the Harvard Innovation Lab, yet to be open, just a concept. And I started reading about it, and I remembered having been interested in entrepreneurship when I was there, and there wasn't a lot of resources and support, and how I had always had this passion for supporting the entrepreneurial community, particularly in Boston, like deep interest in helping the Boston community. And in fact, I had this idea of what we now know is co-working space. Years before that existed, just this idea of bringing entrepreneurs together in this collaborative community. So it just kind of seemed like everything I had been looking for. And in true Harvard fashion, the interview process lasted, I think, 9 months, 12 months maybe even. Interviewed with every person at Harvard, the deans of every school. It was an amazing experience. And along the way, what I realized was how unique and transformational this could be to the university if it was done well. Yet at the same time, I did my own due diligence and all of my network and my contacts in the community. What do you think about this Harvard Innovation Lab idea? Do you think I should, take the job? And I had a number of people tell me, career suicide. Do not take that job. What does Harvard know about entrepreneurship? It's going to be a colossal failure. And I think there's just a part of me that is rebellious and likes a challenge, and I decided I wanted to prove everyone wrong. But I love this whole idea of the cross-disciplinary approach to entrepreneurship, which I didn't realize was so unique. It seemed so obvious to me, but bringing together all of the Harvard schools under one umbrella and resourcing them so that they could pursue their ventures. And so, that's how I ended up there. And since then, I'm even more a believer in what we were doing and committed to our mission. So happy to talk more about that if you'd like.
Yeah, sure, excellent. So tell us a little bit about how it works, for people that don't know exactly how it works. And then maybe a little bit about the early days and compared to today, what has changed. But maybe the first question is how does it work? How do people get involved in
sure. So the first thing to know is that it is all 12 Harvard schools, so the college and all of the graduate schools. And I think we're one of the only examples of this one Harvard vision, which I think is just incredibly powerful. When you think of the diversity of schools that are at Harvard and the students that come through those schools, it's an incredibly powerful mechanism. But for those of you who do know Harvard, it's an incredibly siloed organization. What did they say? Every tub on its own bottom. I kept hearing that when I got to Harvard. But our governance model is really unique. So my bosses are the deans of all the schools, and also including the provost. So the support from the top is so incredible, and I had no idea how unusual of a model that was in the university ecosystem. So lots and lots of other universities have now come to us and said, how did you pull that off? That's really interesting. But I think that's the secret sauce to the space. But how do you get involved? Any Harvard student from any Harvard school, as long as you have an active ID, you swipe your ID and you come and go as you please. We have 30,000 square feet of space, open co-working space, but more than that, it's really about the programming and the people and the resources. So I like to think about it in terms of a couple different areas. There's expert resourcing, so people teaching workshops 2 to 3 nights a week. And by the way, most of those are open to the public as well. We have experts in residence, lawyers in residence, funders in residence, all doing office hours with students. We have folks doing industry roundtables, founders dinners. A lot of skill building and knowledge sharing occurs on a daily basis. And then there's experiential learning, and that's things like our challenges. So you can You don't have an idea, you don't have a team, but you can join a challenge to solve a particular problem in the world. And we help you form a team and ideate and submit a proposal. And many of those folks don't even end up starting a venture, but they've had this amazing transformational experience. And by the way, our mission is not necessarily commercialization, which I really loved. It's really the educational mission that we're trying to create the innovators of tomorrow. So whether you start a company today, 10 years from now, we're indifferent to that. We're focused more on the inputs and how we can help you along that journey. So the experiential learning opportunities are really a way for anyone to get involved. And by the way, only one founder has to be from Harvard, so the broader community gets to participate in a lot of what we do. And then, if you really do want to commercialize and you have a well-formed idea and team, we have what we call the Venture Incubation Program. And we do that 3 times a year. It's kind of our version of an accelerator program, but I hate to use that word because there's a lot of connotations that go along with that. We're really trying to get you further, faster, meeting your milestones, and helping you along that journey. And it unlocks more resources, a really robust mentor program, and strong sense of community, and other workshops and events for similarly staged companies. But as I mentioned earlier, while our mission is not necessarily commercialization, I don't put my investor hat on and pick winners. I'm agnostic. I just want to help any venture along that journey. So it enables us to have a really amazing breadth of ideas. 30% are social impact, 30% health and sciences, 30% technology. So I think companies that might not necessarily get the support in other places, because of our educational mission, it really helps them along the way. And I think as I mentioned, Art Lifting earlier, a company like that, I don't think would exist otherwise. So it's been really exciting, and we've been so fortunate and pleased with we were just talking before this started about just the volume. Every 3 months we have over 150 applications to our program. It's incredible to me that there's so many students at Harvard looking to start ventures. We have students writing into their applications to come to Harvard about starting a venture and coming to the iLab. So I think more than anything, I think it speaks to this generation of innovators, and you go to college, this is just something you do, which is, again, so different from when I was at business school and everyone laughed at me and thought I was crazy.
So, I have a bunch of questions, but to follow up on the second one I was telling you, so what has changed from the beginning as you started and now? I know you're opening a life lab, so you're expanding. So tell us a little bit at the beginning and what is the biggest differences that you can tell 5 years afterwards?
Yeah, sure. So I can't believe it's been almost 5 years. It seems like many lifetimes, but it's also gone by really quickly. And when we opened, it was this big university-wide experiment. If we build it, will they come? Across the river, for one thing, because Boston is really far away from the center of the universe of Harvard. We validated that quite quickly and had all 12 schools represented right away. And so what enabled us to do is to seed this burgeoning ecosystem. So after a couple of years of existence, what happened is, because it was a student center, once you graduated, we had to kick you out, which was an enormous pain point for me, having been a struggling entrepreneur, knowing how hard and lonely it is, and how much we benefited these ventures. I begged the university to let me support alumni, and couldn't do it physically at the iLab. So we begged and pleaded and got a building right across the street, and that's now called the Launch Lab. Again, only one Harvard founder has to be on the team. We opened it up as a prototype, and we try to be very, practice what we preach and develop an MVP and test it with customers as quickly as possible. So we went out and did that, and we built it, and we opened it in a very short period of time, and before we know it, we were full and busting at the seams, and we had 15 ventures, and they kept adding people, and there was no place to sit. And so we tripled in size last year. We have 130 workstations, 8,500 square feet, and we're at capacity pretty much all the time with a wait list. So what it says to me is that we are helping ventures. They do have this desire to stay within this iLab's ecosystem, benefiting from each other. You know, everything we do comes down to that collaboration and connection and community and the people that say, you know, we never would have met each other had it not been for something that we did at the iLab. So if we can facilitate that and leverage that, it's an incredibly powerful mechanism. And then you mentioned the Life Lab. So another pain point has been life sciences ventures. And I'm not a scientist, but from what I understand, in order to get funding, you have to replicate and validate your science. So you've got this really great scientific discovery, but unless you can replicate that, the investors are not going to write you a $20 million check. So a lot of the progress was stalled for these ventures because they didn't have a place to do their science, to do their experiments. They don't have a lot of funding. There's a wonderful facility called Lab Central right around the corner from here. They had a 2-year wait list and were quite frankly too expensive for a lot of the other of the early stage ventures. So this is our answer to that. So opening in November, adjacent to the iLab is a 15,000 square foot, fully equipped and permanent lab facility with 36 lab benches. We'll probably have 20 different ventures in residence. They do pay about half market rate, but it's incredibly affordable and short term and turnkey. So we really hope to catalyze their development and send them off into the world so they can get further, faster, and get the funding they need. But again, this whole ecosystem we're building has become such a powerful network for connection. And I go back to that original statement about this cross-disciplinary approach. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, if you bring people together with very different backgrounds to solve problems, a better solution will be found. I truly believe that.
So that's really interesting. And you started talking before about the educational mission or the goal being on the educational side. So an interesting thing to talk about would be also how are you seeing in terms of the 12 schools being involved and the idea of entrepreneurship or training, because people from the business school, they get a lot more business training, business knowledge, but somebody wants to start a company, has no business training at all, has no idea how to find money, or and at the same time, are you seeing all the schools thinking or rethinking what they need to teach their students? Is there any overlap on what needs to be taught? In terms of educating because this is a very particular space. It's very unique. So is that feeding back into the schools and what they teach, soft skills or hard skills from the students?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because we never set out to replace the academic curriculum, and Harvard's really good at teaching people how to learn, and we don't want to mess with that. But what we do is we sit alongside the academic curriculum and complement it and teach them how to do. And you think about entrepreneurship, you have to practice. Otherwise, it's entrepreneurship appreciation. Like music appreciation. You take a class about music, but you don't actually learn how to play an instrument. And I kind of think of entrepreneurship that way. You have to actually do it and practice. And what we provide is this really safe place to try and fail often. I'm a huge proponent of failure for learning and getting to the right place. But to your point, has it fed back to the academic side? What we hear from the deans is that there is an increased demand in entrepreneurial-related courses, particularly at the non-business schools. So, for instance, the Ed School at Harvard, we have a tremendous amount of entrepreneurs that want to disrupt the educational system from the bottom up. And so they're starting ventures. So they are going back to the administrators saying, we want more entrepreneurial education. So it's really interesting, and you see it happening at the med school and other places where they're saying, "Ooh, should we open up an iLab?" And again, we think the benefit is this cross-disciplinary approach, so we want to continue to support all of the schools. But surprisingly, every single semester we will have someone from every school. I mean, the Divinity School. Believe it or not, there's innovation happening in that side of things. The dental school, even the law school, which you don't see a lot of entrepreneurs coming out of. Usually you go to law school to become a lawyer. So it's really interesting to see. And then you know, you talk about the humanities, and there's all this talk about, humanities are dying, and what's a liberal arts education? But how can you use innovation to disrupt and to augment the humanities? How do you bring Shakespeare to life in a mobile app? And there's students doing that. So I think it actually, it supports the traditional education without having to change it necessarily.
That's great. You mentioned also that there are kind of 30% that you mentioned, like three
Yeah.
main areas: life sciences, if I remember correctly, social impact, and technology. Do you see that the schools participate evenly? Do you hope there were more participation in some disciplines? I'm just interested in saying what are the most salient enterprises and which ones are having more impact, or
Yeah. It's really across the board, and I think, again, one of the coolest parts of it is when teams are made up of multiple Harvard schools. So half of our teams have more than one Harvard school on their team, and another half has more than 2 Harvard schools, and some have 4 or 5 Harvard schools. And those, to me, are the most interesting. But another fascinating thing is, for the Life Lab, for instance, we have 11 ventures that we've already accepted into the program. They represent 8 different Harvard schools. So it's not necessarily just the medical school or the scientists that are bringing the life sciences ventures to life. It's all schools. We have a divinity school alumni at the Launch Lab who has an amazing company to innovate in cancer research. So that's what I love, is that the ideas are coming from places that you wouldn't imagine, not necessarily the discipline that they come from.
Let's talk a little bit about relationship with industry. Are there any connections with industry? Are there sponsorships, or how can people with private companies or private investment are they able to engage with the Harvard Lab? How does that work?
Yeah, so we're supported and funded by donors, alumni donors, and that's the Harvard model, and we're very good at it. So we are not allowed to accept corporate sponsorships. I remember when we first opened, and lots of corporations and folks came and said, I'd like to write you a check. Where do I write it? Who do I make it out to? We'd like to support you, and we're unable to accept that, but they can support us in other ways, through our Lawyers in Residence program, things like that. But to your point about corporations and how do you engage with them, that's always been a bit of a challenge for us, because our mandate, unlike places like the MIT Media Lab that have a different mission, our mandate is really education. And so there has to be true value to the students. And our challenge with the corporations often is, how do you make sure it's a good experience and a valuable experience for the students, but also being a valuable experience for the corporations? So we've done something called an entrepreneurial program over the summertime, where we curated a group of Harvard students from across the university, diversity of backgrounds, to work on solving problems within corporations. The one we did first with Fidelity, and then the following summer we did a number of financial services firms in the area of Bitcoin and blockchain. And incredible experience for the companies, incredible experience for the students, many of whom have gone to work for those companies. Many of their ideas are now being implemented by the companies. So things like that I like, because I think they work on both sides of the value chain. But always thinking of new and novel ways to do things. As I said, we like to practice what we preach, so we're always experimenting with interesting new models. So stay tuned, there could be some other ones coming.
So relating to your early starts in the investment world in VC, for companies that go through the pure program, or maybe through the venture lab, right? What's their connection with funding? How do you help or advise your startup on funding? Do you provide opportunities to meet with VCs or with seed investors or angel investors? And what advice would you give the founders, people in the audience, about funding in general?
Yeah, so we try to be Switzerland. We try to be very impartial, but we're a marketplace. So we try to create a full marketplace for people and giving them access to the resources to help them succeed. There are some innovation centers, university-based, that say, investors stay away. We don't want you anywhere near our students. You're going to exploit them. And we actually think, you know what? It's a part of the ecosystem. You're going to need to raise money, so let's help you develop relationships with them early on in the process. And I'm a huge proponent of building those relationships before you're asking for money. So we have a lot of our experts and residents that are in the investor community. We have individuals, angels, VCs, all across the board, different industry focus, and we bring them all in. And it's very self-selecting, so students sign up to meet with them on a one-on-one basis, and we try to curate high-quality groups. But if someone comes and no one signs up for appointments, that might say something about their industry sector or whatever it might be. So we try to create a full-service marketplace. I don't specifically connect people because I think that gives you it's just the wrong kind of relationship. But we want to give them exposure to a wide variety of investors, and again, it's worked pretty well. A lot of our companies are seed funded while they're still students. It's incredible to see the opportunities out there. And in addition, we recommend they apply to a lot of these accelerators and incubators and competitions and challenges. So they might be doing the Venture Incubation Program or the President's Innovation Challenge at Harvard, but they also might be applying to Techstars or Mass Challenge, and there's so many Boston resources that they can leverage at the same time.
So given the breadth and the diversity of organizations that are, startups that are being incubated or that are starting, do you have any specific advice? I mean, I'm thinking about life sciences, very, very, very different from a social enterprise, very different from a technology company. Would you have any specific advice for them in terms of how to think about funding? Are there very different sources, or is there some general advice that applies to all of them? How to think about going forward to think about getting funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think even within an industry, depending upon what it is you're trying to do and how much capital you need, there's lots of different strategies. There's some companies that are not the traditional VC-funded companies, and my advice to them is you need to find an individual angel investor or group of angels that has a personal passion around what it is you're doing, because otherwise, the traditional methods might not get you to that next phase. And, if you're a life sciences company, there's so many interesting SBIRs and grants and non-dilutive funding out there if you know how to do it, and that can get you from point A to point B. For life sciences, again, you have to be at a certain stage of development before the investors are going to write you those large checks. So it really depends within those industry sectors, and a lot of what we do is advising these teams one-on-one. So the way our staff is structured is by industry practice areas. So I mentioned social impact, technology, and health and sciences. And we have someone on staff that heads up each of those practice areas, and they act as advisors to those students, and they have a network and a Rolodex and contacts in that industry. They develop programming for those students. So it all kind of works together, and it becomes a very individualized program. Someone I was giving someone a tour today, and they said, "What's one of your biggest challenges?" And it's really the breadth of the ideas and the industries and the stage of development, because we want to go deep. We don't just want to touch the surface. We really want to go deep and really impact these ventures, and that's hard to do when you're cutting across so many different areas.
So, given that breadth, and you mentioned 150 applicants and about 50 get accepted every 3 months, more or less, right? So, what would be an advice for somebody who's applying? What would be the criteria that you're looking for? What type of entrepreneur or entrepreneurship, partnership, or team, or is it more on the idea or a combination? What are you looking for when you decide, yes, this is iLab material?
Yeah, for us, again, I don't put my investor hat on. It's really stage of development rather than picking winners. And I think, again, with an educational focus, that's really important. So we give priority to multiple school teams because, again, that's kind of where we think the powerful solutions are going to come from. But mostly it's, how well-formed is your idea? How well-formed is your team? Have you validated the market opportunity? Again, have you tested it on someone other than your, close circle of friends? Because, the program itself, if you're not in the venture incubation program, you can participate in, 80% of our resources. You can come to our workshops, you can go to the EIR appointments. But the VIP program is specifically to get you from point A to point B, help you meet your milestones. You showed this level of commitment. I want to commercialize. I want to take this to the next level and actually create a venture. And then we unlock more resources for you that are stage appropriate. So level of commitment, stage of development, how well formed the idea is, really goes into that. And then again, we want to have multiple school representation.
And is that unlocking through specific programs, or is that tailored to each team? Like you treat each case individually, or is it you've been accepted and now here's a program that kind of serves everybody in that stage?
Yeah, it's actually a hybrid. It's a little of both. And we have to keep in mind that they're students and they have other priorities, and even though they have this incredible level of commitment, some of them are there every day, and it always boggles my mind that how they get their homework done. It's really, it unlocks things like our mentor program and industry roundtables and the founders dinners, a stronger sense of community, more networking opportunities, and the staff that I talked about being the advisors in each of these practice areas. You get assigned one of them who works with you on an ongoing basis. In addition, you have a mentor that works with you throughout that semester. So it's a much deeper level of commitment and a deeper relationship that they build with the advisors that are surrounding them.
So I have a couple kind of final questions, and we'll let people engage in conversation. Wanted to ask a little bit about Boston. You mentioned you push you encourage your students and your alumni to take advantage of the resources. So, what makes Boston so special in your point of view, having been there in different, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, and now as an educator in entrepreneurship? What makes it so different, and what would you highlight in terms of those resources? What is the strongest suit that we can find here in Boston for entrepreneurs?
So I am a huge proponent of Boston, and I dare to say that there's no better place to start a company and no better time to do it here in Boston. And Boston's certainly gotten a bad rap over the past years, and has been through some struggles. But over the past 5 years, I think it's gone in the right direction in so many different ways. And it's an incredible ecosystem. And for first-time entrepreneurs, and again, a lot of what we're trying to do is to create the network for these first-time entrepreneurs. The Boston network is so incredible for a number of reasons. I mean, one, the talent, right? There's no other place in the world that has such an abundance of talent with all the universities. It's this deep level of commitment to impact. We're kind of known as doing the hard stuff. If you want to go build a consumer app, go out to Silicon Valley. If you want to actually change the world, stay in Boston. But I really believe that, and there's just this amazing network of serial entrepreneurs who have done it over and over again and are so deeply committed to the Boston ecosystem. Some of the big pillar companies and the big anchor companies in Boston are really so supportive of that. And then you layer on all of the incredible resources like what you're doing, and any night there's a choice of amazing different meetups and events to go to. People always say, Boston's so close and so hard to break into, and I say, just go to one event. All you got to do is show up, and once you show up, you're immediately in the ecosystem. I just think this. When you talk about the investor community, again, there was this kind of exodus of kind of traditional VC firms, center of gravity, moving to the West Coast a number of years ago. But the investors that are here have made a commitment to Boston, and I think they're also reimagining and reinventing what it means to be an investor. And it's a much more entrepreneur-friendly environment. So they're in it for the long haul, and we want to make this a partnership, and we really want to support you. And I don't think you get that in other ecosystems. So there's a whole bunch of things that I think contribute to making Boston so special. And, in addition, these industry clusters that we're so good at, life sciences and ed tech and mobile and IoT and robotics, and I actually think VR. We're doing a big VR event coming up soon because I think Boston and Harvard are so uniquely positioned to be a leader in this area because it cuts across so many different disciplines. And I think when you look at Boston and the students at Harvard, education, life sciences, engineering, it really, again, if you can get that cross-disciplinary thing to happen, it's an incredibly powerful mechanism.
Right, and you said something really, really powerful in a way that all these malls are still figuring out how they should align, and all these different models of how to organize the entrepreneurial ecosystem is still taking shape. And so I wanted to ask you the final question and then let everybody participate about the future of the iLab. Where do you see midterm and long term? What's going to be its shape? What do you foresee in the future for what you're building now?
Yeah. I mean, it's augmenting kind of the platform and the foundation that we've built. And I keep mentioning the word connection and collaboration, and the more I do it, the more I see the power in it, that if you can bring people together and facilitate those connections. So what I'm hoping to do is do more of that in a broader way. I'd love to do it beyond Boston even. I mean, there's alumni everywhere. And if we can bring them together in a meaningful way so they can find each other around entrepreneurship, I think that could be incredibly powerful. And then I think it's also kind of stirring the pot around new areas of discipline, like this whole virtual and augmented reality. And, I have this hypothesis, I think a lot of other people do, that this is the next processing platform, like the PC and mobile. And what I'm so fascinated by, again, is all these different industries that it cuts across and how you can disrupt and augment so many industries. And let's help people do that. So if we can bring together the people and the resources and the thought leadership to get those ideas flowing, and then we're opening up an AR/VR lab that's going to have all sorts of equipment and processors and projectors so students can ideate and work on their ideas in the area of augmented and virtual reality. So it's just continuing to resource them in a more robust and complete way. And it sounds so simple and trite, but get them further faster. It's kind of what we do. I laugh that I have the best job in the world because I get up every day trying to figure out how to make entrepreneurs successful. It's pretty simple. It's a great thing to be doing.
Great. Well, let me offer some questions and who's interested in. Yeah. Can you please, and then help pass the mic along.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm actually an example of someone who came out of law school to be an entrepreneur.
All right.
So I created 20 different publications and sold them to Thomson Reuters. So my question is there a way that the broader community could be involved with your program to work with, people that are creating things, or just be a part of some of the creations that are taking place?
Yeah, absolutely. We have so many contributors, whether it's a workshop instructor, if you have a particular expertise or content that you like to deliver, you could act as an advisor or mentor to our teams, come in and do office hours. We have so many providers, lawyers, investors, marketers, technologists, et cetera, that come in and meet with students. You could be a judge for our competition. So lots and lots of ways to get involved.
Great. Hello. Thanks so much for your chat tonight. Just wanted to add on to Carlos's question earlier. In the past 5 years, can you talk a bit about what you've seen in terms of social innovation change, in terms of the volumes of business ideas that are coming your way from the students, as well as the funding seen in Boston in being more around social impact and innovation?
Yeah. No, that's a really, really big question. I think one of the biggest surprises and excitement about what it is we do is the number of social impact ventures that are coming out of the iLab. And by the way, not all of them are nonprofits. Some are for-profit social impact. So lots of different corporate structure models. So I've seen that continue to grow since we started, and again, we have a whole practice area supporting social impact, and a person who's dedicated to bringing programming and bringing these ideas to life. And I think also what's interesting about the students at Harvard, and I'm sure more broadly, but it's my only data point, is the interest in impact in general in whatever it is they're doing. You know, I have a beauty company that has these single ingredient beauty products that are all sourced from women-owned farms in small remote places to create economic development. So companies that are seemingly consumer product or whatever it might be seem to have an impact focus. We have Rumi Spice, which is importing Afghan saffron, and it was a bunch of ex-military people who wanted to create, again, economic development. So there's just so many interesting things happening. When you ask about the funding, though, when you go to the Launch Lab, a lot of the alumni ventures, it's not 30% social impact. So they get to a certain place, and then they seem to not have the traction, I think, other ventures have, and we need to change that. We need more impact funds, more alternative funding sources, and we're working on it. But, again, we haven't been doing it for that long, and so we're hoping to move the needle going forward.
Thank you. I can see your enthusiasm. I have two questions, if you don't mind. One is, I'm familiar with the Babson's Summer Entrepreneurship Program. Are you familiar with that? If so,
Not in detail, but I know they
But
have one.
is it similar? Is it the same?
It's interesting. I think Babson has a summer accelerator, which is full-time. I think they do give them money and residency even, and they might even take people from outside of Boston. I know like the MIT Global Accelerator also brings people in from other places, but I don't know the details about them.
It's going to be the same learning experience.
I think so. I think, it's interesting because every university has its own model, and what works for that university it might not work for another one. So, I hate to say, our way is the right way, and what they're doing isn't right. Everyone does what works within their ecosystem. But the one thing to note is that there's so many opportunities. And again, you don't always have to be at that university to participate in them. There's competitions and challenges and things like that you can join a team. And we have so many non-Harvard people that participate in our programs.
And then, do you have a system to measure the success of these businesses?
Yeah, it's a really challenging task. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we focus on inputs, not outputs. So it's not necessarily about commercialization. We don't take equity in any of the ventures. We don't have any ulterior motives. They own all their own IP. So we measure in quite amazing detail who's coming from what school and how often and how many ventures are formed and what they're doing and what they're learning. Net Promoter is something we use quite a bit to try to understand where our impact is and where we're really helping students. And while commercialization is not our primary priority, we care very deeply about the outcomes as well. And so we're starting to track that without letting it become our main metric, because I think that would undermine the educational mission.
Thank you, Jody, for your fascinating and succinctly describing your work here. I stood up an open innovation program for a corporate and ran a corporate accelerator for a couple of years. And I'm seeing, on the metric side, basically, we use a lot of qualitative and quantitative metrics. Because as a company, we needed to see something, at least at the end of 5 years, if not in each year. So that would have been my first question to you. The second one is, could you describe a little bit more what your mentor program looks like? Because as you described, the students working in your educational environment have a variety of ways of working with large corporations. And in fact, we did some of that with Stanford and UC Berkeley. So are you looking to add more layers to this whole program and have a corporate student interaction. Really strange to do that.
Yeah. So as far as metrics for like corporate innovation programs, again, I agree. You have to justify your existence. And for us, the university is trying to create this one Harvard cross-disciplinary approach to entrepreneurship. So as long as all schools are represented and we're taking them from point A to point B and helping them along their journey, that's the most important thing. In fact, I focus a lot of my efforts on opening up the funnel even wider. We don't ever want it to be a place just for ventures that are created and commercializing to come. We really want to capture them much earlier in the process and support them along that journey. So very difficult to measure. We're always working on ways to measure. I'm very much focused on impact rather than volume. And we're getting there, but by no means are we experts. With regard to the mentor program, that's another one that we are continuously improving and iterating on, because for me, mentorship is all about chemistry and relationships, and we've even developed a very sophisticated algorithm to try to match them, but we augment that with a face-to-face kind of speed dating night, because nothing replaces that individual chemistry that may or may not be there. You might have the perfect experience and background to mentor someone, but if you don't click, it doesn't work. And conversely, you may come from a very different industry, but you just fall in love with this entrepreneur and what they're trying to do. And so we've seen so many amazing mentor relationships formed that you wouldn't have been able to predict. And then to your point about corporates, I actually have a very adamantly opposed to potential for conflict with a mentor relationship, because it's a personal relationship. We feel very strongly that you should be advising the individual, not necessarily the idea, and the potential for success of that idea. The best mentor in the world might tell you that this is not going to work and it's a bad idea. And I think if you don't have that lens, you might not be giving them the best advice. So I don't even let investors become entrepreneurs. If that's your day job, we'll get you involved in other ways. You can't be in our mentor program. Our mentors are serial entrepreneurs who are actually doing it, still doing it, have very relevant skill sets, and know what it's like to be in their shoes. Because a lot of it is founders' issues and equity splits and just those really early stage issues. Yeah. Oh, very much so. And everything we do, I truly believe it's all about quality. That we have to curate incredible quality of instructors and mentors and advisors. Otherwise, you're commoditized. There's so many places for resources, so we want to make sure it's very high quality. And by the way, you don't have to be from Harvard, so I feel very strongly that I just want the best mentors and advisors.
Hello, Jody. First of all, thank you for your valuable lessons. And I have two questions. One is aimed for the entrepreneurial side of you, and the second one is aimed for the investor side of you. And from the entrepreneurial side of you, I'm coming from Mexico, and I believe that the walls of collaboration, as you mentioned, are lowering, despite whatever Trump says. But on that topic, I wanted to ask you, as being the director of Idea Lab, have you seen an increase in international members within your community? If so, what challenges do they face that other entrepreneurs are not facing? That's the question for the entrepreneurial you. And regarding the investor you, what would prevent you from investing in international startups coming here? And how are you addressing those points both as an investor and as Idea Lab?
Okay, there's a lot there. Interestingly, we have a very global student population that are coming from every country imaginable, from all over the world. And what I love about that is they're taking their learnings and their ideas and bringing it back to their home countries. So I see a lot going on internationally and globally, and that trend is going to continue. On the flip side, students coming here, we, as long as you're a Harvard student or you're on a team with a Harvard student, we can support you. But we don't we don't have any partnerships or anything specific with global or international organizations. But very supportive. You know, Startup Chile comes and does office hours and recruits for their programs, and we've had a lot of our founders go to international accelerators and incubators. So there's a nice, again, that whole marketplace effect. There's a nice seamless interaction back and forth. I don't know if that answers.
And just as sort of from the investor side, what would you mention from investors in startups, and why would you prefer startup focusing on international?
Well, I'm not an investor currently, but as an investor, nothing. I mean, to me, it's all about ideas, people, and execution, and I don't think it has anything to do with that.
So we have about 3 last questions here, there, and then please, after that, you can approach Jody and...
It's really hot up here, too. Lights.
Good evening, Jody.
Thanks for sharing the experience. My intent of coming here was to learn how to take a tested product to the market. And for someone on a similar situation like me, what kind of advice would you give?
Well, that's a very large, open-ended question. How to bring a product to market?
Yeah, any mentorship. What are the possible avenues where we can get some kind of mentorship or help? I'm not from Harvard, obviously, so.
Yeah. I mean, again, talking about the Boston ecosystem, there's just an amazing amount of resources to support that. And one of my biggest pieces of advice to people is don't even think about stealth mode. Everyone wants, there's this idea of, I don't want to tell anyone about my idea quite yet because they're going to steal it. I think stealth mode is the worst thing you can do. You need to get out there early and often and pitch as often as you can, go to as many events as you can, get to know as many people who can all contribute. It might be talent acquisition, it might be an investor, it might be an advisor or a mentor. And you never know who you're going to meet and who's going to be passionate about what you want to do. So I guess that's my biggest piece of advice is put yourself out there and get as much feedback as early in the process as you can.
Hi, Jody. Thanks. I recognize that this is Harvard. Can everybody hear me?
Thank you.
I recognize that this is Harvard and recruitment's not a big problem, but are you starting to see, even though it's early, are you starting to see that certain students are coming to Harvard, maybe they're not business oriented, but because they want to do something in the social space but turn it into something? Is it giving Harvard a little bit of a recruiting advantage, and are you measuring and looking for that? Does that question make sense?
What do you mean a recruiting advantage?
Someone's out there and they want to study a particular area of the humanities. They're
I
going back
see,
and forth
yeah.
between Harvard and Cornell, and whoop, that pushes them
Yeah,
either one way or the other.
It is interesting. I mean, we hear from the admissions office that students are writing it into their applications, which is so fascinating to me. Again, this generation of innovators, that's a big component of where they choose to go to college is where can I develop my own ideas and who has innovation spaces, and you can see the proliferation of innovation spaces at other universities. And I think about Harvard as being a little late to the entrepreneurial game. There's some universities that have been doing it a lot longer than we have. But your point, I think, is right on, that it's in these untraditional areas that aren't typically supported. MIT does a phenomenal job of supporting entrepreneurship in technology and sciences. But in some of the humanities and the social sciences, probably doesn't have that same support. And I would argue that what we're doing in this very broad, cross-disciplinary way is supporting all of those endeavors equally. We have a cultural entrepreneurship challenge. Innovating within the area of the arts. And that's, again, an often overlooked area of entrepreneurship. And so being able to do things like that when you're not necessarily focused on commercialization, it gives us the freedom to support everyone. And so, maybe it is an advantage.
So you mentioned the model is you have students come up with ideas and then you have mentors support those ideas and but do you have any option for a reverse, where somebody proposes a problem and then looks for a student team to work on it, and then together we commercialize it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say that's the one area we're not great at. We do have the challenges where we propose areas for innovation, whether it's cultural entrepreneurship, we'll put forth a bunch of different problem areas, or the social impact, clean water, food, education, whatever it might be. And we offer those prompts up, and students form teams and ideate around solving particular problems in that area. But very rarely, but occasionally, I'll have typically a professor or someone saying, I have this idea, but I don't have time to work on it. Can you find a bunch of students? And that's kind of not what we do, because it's our belief that you come in with your ideas and we help foster that. That's authentic entrepreneurship, and that's how it happens organically. Now, on the flip side, not everyone has the idea, and there's a lot of people, we call them joiners, that are interested in working on an idea that someone else has. So we do a lot of facilitation of how do you help founders find the joiners. You might have an idea, but you don't have the skills to execute on that idea. But there's not a lot of, give me a list of problems to solve and I'll put a team on it, because to us, that's not true, that's not authentic and organic. Does that make sense?
So someone from outside cannot come in and propose a problem. Some example,
industrial example you gave me fit to that. You said that over the summer.
Oh, the entrepreneurial program? Yeah, we did with corporations. So we had 5 different financial services corporations that proposed different problems to be solved inside the companies, and students worked on those ideas. So that was our one area where we realized that not every student has the same risk profile to start a company, and they might want to innovate within the context of a larger corporation. So we do things like that. But at the same time, if you're looking to join a team, you could come to our Innovation Challenge kickoff and find someone with a shared passion. And as long as one of the members of the team is from Harvard, then you can form a team. If that's the answer to your question.
I may be the last one to ask me a question. I'm from G Ventures, so it was great to see an FMP graduate also, doing innovation, leading the startups. My quick question is, being in the ventures as well, we see a lot of, different sort of spectrum of ideas, and the art-related ones or the social impact ones, we are seeing often, but we are not able to do anything about them.
Yeah.
So, given the humanities sides of the Harvard, as well as being a big fan of, Boston, would you consider, across all these, incubators here, where these social impact startups being maybe always the small percentage of those, or not necessarily getting the, VC money, maybe collectively there could be, fundraising, again, given the Harvard's, tradition, or some other ways, basically, whether it can be addressed or not.
Yeah, no, I love it. Fully supportive. Love to talk to you about it.
Last question?
Sure, yeah. Hi, Jody.
Last but not least.
Thanks for your time. I'm from South Korea. I studied entrepreneurship at Babson College. And having met a host of different social entrepreneurs, I feel like when I look at companies like Warby Parker or Tom's, it seems extra difficult to be able to chase that double bottom line. I'm sure you've met plenty of successful social entrepreneurs that are able to create both kinds of these impacts, social and financial. Do you think that there are any distinctive characteristics that led them to be successful? That's kind of different from other successful people at the corporations or regular startups. If you could name any, it would be great.
Yeah, I think it's a little too early to have those insights, and what's a common denominator of the successful companies that have been able to do that. But I'm really intrigued and really interested in finding the answer to that, because I personally believe that's the vision for the future. And I always joke that if the word social impact goes away, that's a really good thing, because that means every company is focused on impact, and that's just a part of doing business and a part of what they do. So right now, it's that double bottom line, and how do you do both, and it's such a challenge, and only a few companies have achieved that. I don't know, I think 10, 20 years from now, it just is, and it's just ubiquitous. But your point is exactly right. What is it? What's the secret sauce? What's the common thread or set of things that enables them to succeed? And I don't think we really know yet.
So for those interested in applying or getting involved, are there any important dates that they should be aware of that are upcoming that you want to promote before we close?
Yeah, the President's Challenge, President's Innovation Challenge kickoff. Alex, are you there? October 13th, I'm guessing. It's in a few weeks. That also, it's a great way. That's when we kick off our challenge that occurs throughout the entire academic year. And in the end, the finalists receive some funding, and the winners receive even more funding. But more importantly, it's a really great way to form a team and ideate around a shared passion in lots of different problem areas. What else is coming up? Oh my goodness, yes, Hub Week. So I mentioned this VR, AR event we're doing on September 28th. And for those of you, if you're not familiar with Hub Week, become familiar. It's just an amazing showcase of the diversity and the cross-disciplinary ecosystem that is Boston, bringing together the arts and the universities and technology, and there's so many amazing events. And in conjunction with that, we're doing this VR and AR event Wednesday, September 28th, 1 to 5. And I'm calling it an exploration. The idea is just to inspire, educate, and most importantly, bring together this interested community. We're doing breakouts in the area of education, healthcare, retail, construction, education, entertainment. So it'll give you a really nice cross-section of the potential of this industry to come. And we're bringing some really interesting thought leaders. So we're super excited about that. And I think, again, it's an opportunity to bring together not only the Harvard community, but the broader Boston ecosystem in a really novel way. So thanks for
Great, so thanks so much for your time. This is really fantastic. And thank you everybody for coming. And please give me another warm applause for Jody. Thank you so much.